Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Linda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is June 14th, 2023, and I'm here with Judee Showalter, class of 1984, alumna of the college, and also Judee is retiring after 20 years as a library staff member, most recently a circulation supervisor. We will get to that, but first I want to talk about, I want to welcome you, Judee, and talk about your student days. So tell us how you first came to Randolph-Macon.
My family is from Southern California, and we moved here in 1977, and my sister came to Randolph-Macon. My sister is 4 years older than I am, and she is class of 1981. In Southern California, almost everybody goes to public university, and she had expected to go to Cal State Long Beach. That was her plan, and then my parents moved, and she decided to come with. And so they just assumed she would go to VCU because they thought it would be like Cal State Long Beach, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were kind of casting around for somewhere for her to go, and my father's boss was on the board here and brought them up, and she really liked it. And so she came. She was class of 1981. And then through high school, while I was in high school, I decided I wanted to go into the ministry. And so Randolph-Macon, being the oldest United Methodist-related college by date of charter, was kind of a logical place for me to go, and I got a really great scholarship. Mm-hmm. We didn't have Bailey's back then, but we did have a half-tuition scholarship that you paid back in service. Mm-hmm. So I had that, and then I did 4 years of service to the United Methodist Church, and my payment was cleared.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Who was your father's boss, just for the record?
Ralph Thomas.
Okay, just who was on the board of trustees.
I
okay.
think so. We were talking about that the other day with my dad, and he's like, he may have been like on the board at University of Richmond, and it somehow, but Ralph Thomas got us here.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when you and your sister overlapped for a year?
We overlapped for a year, and we lived down the hall.
Oh, okay.
Which was, if I had to do it over again, I would not live 2 doors down from my sister. At the time, I mean, that's just where I got assigned. It was my random freshman assignment. And I lived in the same dorm for 4 years, so that worked out well. But it's a little awkward.
Yeah, right. But you made your own way on campus. It's obvious, and you were pursuing a different path to begin with. So it sounds like you.
Yes, my sister is a math major. Yeah. So she was, and her friends were math majors, and I was a religious studies major, and I sang in the choir, and we had really different lives.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's great. So I just want to take a step back for a minute, because when you arrived on campus in the fall of 1980, women students were no longer a real novelty, as the college had gone co-ed in 1971, but it was still within the first decade of having women having co-education. So what was that like?
By the time I got here, women were just under 50%, and by the time I graduated, we were over 50%. But in the like 48 to 52 range, it wasn't a big change. So you didn't really notice it a great deal. Of course, in the 1980s, we had women's dorms and men's dorms. People still called it the men's college, and Randolph-Macon Women's College was still Randolph-Macon Women's College. So when I told people I went to Randolph-Macon, they assumed I went to the women's college. And I had to say, no, I go to Ashland. But it wasn't, there were a couple of faculty members around who still talked about the good old days, but they weren't rude or dismissive. It was always kind of funny. I took logic from Dr. Offenbacher, and there were 6 girls and 1 male in our class, poor Doug, and we did better than he did. And Dr. Offenbacher would, and in those days they would tell you your grades in front of everybody, which they also don't do anymore. But Dr. Offenbacher would come in and he would huff and he would puff and he would say, "You allowed those women to beat you again." And
Yeah.
things like
It's kind
that.
of playful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and and Dr. Offenbacher he had been opposed to women. He was very open to the fact that he had been opposed to women, and one of the reasons that he was opposed to women is because he swore, and you don't swear in front of ladies. So he had to change how he taught.
And did he change? Or did he
Yes.
swear?
No, he didn't swear very much. He carried around a coffee mug that said "bitch, bitch, bitch." But yes, which also wouldn't fly these days.
Right. That could be offensive. Yeah.
But other than that,
Yeah.
I think by the time I came along, he'd realized that the women were just as good as students as men. I think he really had believed he was going to have to dumb down his classes,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't. It actually raised his level, so he was good with it.
So the tide had really turned by the time you came. It sounds like that the college really went on a pretty quick pace if it was nearly 50% in the first decade. So that's good. Very good. Well, you mentioned you were in the choir. So tell us about that was a place you found a home.
I sang in the choir in high school, obviously, so when I came up here, I auditioned for the choir immediately. And Gordon Brock was new, so we were like his first class. Buster Ward had been directing the choir, and he was still around, but they had hired Gordon Brock to do choral music and expand the choir. And that is still the group that I am in touch with. That was kind of home base for me. And I met Ed there. Well, Ed and I met at scholarship interviews the year before we came.
Yes,
but
for the record, you're speaking of
my husband, Ed
Showalter,
Showalter,
right.
who is a faculty member here.
Yeah.
But we met in the choir. Ed also had always sung in the choir in high school, and so he joined. And we had a choir reunion this year. They do special reunions for the choir, and those are a lot of fun. And my 80 to 84 group is always well represented in there.
And was Alva Hughes in that?
Alva Hughes was in there
too. Good. Okay. Because one of our interviews, she really remembers the choir. Well, she did her interview with Buster Ward.
Right.
So there's a lot of good memories there.
Well, and Alva was one of the movers and shakers in the choir, and Ed still has in his things the note when he was applying to the college and they were trying to, they're trying to attract you to come here, that she wrote a note inviting him to audition for the choir. We hear that you sing and we're looking for some men, and please come and audition. And he still has that.
Oh, nice. That's a great memento. And then, of course, for the record, Alva Hughes was class of 81, I believe, and is on the faculty, also on the faculty here in the psychology department. So to have those deep connections in the choir, that's really wonderful. So you met Ed in the choir under Gordon Brock, and then don't think we've mentioned Gordon Brock in another interview particularly, but he died tragically.
Gordon Brock was killed in an automobile accident in, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, but
I think probably about 10 years after we graduated.
Yeah,
like
so in the
96.
90s maybe, yeah, but that was a tragic thing.
It may
yes.
have been not even that long. But he was killed in an automobile accident, and he actually was going to VCU with another student that we knew. And she was not killed, but Debbie Brooks was in the car with him.
That was just, I have heard of the story that he died, tragically. So, but Buster Ward continued on until he retired, and as you mentioned, there was a choir reunion to really celebrate his life and work. Well, also in your student days, we're going to get to your work, but in your student days, I did want to mention that you were in a sorority. So sororities had come by the time.
Well, I was a charter member of the first sorority.
Oh, okay. Do
Phi Mu
tell.
was the first sorority on campus, And I probably would not have joined a sorority, but my roommate and best friend's sister was a Phi Mu at William and Mary, and so she wanted to join, and so I joined with Julia. Julia Robertson was my roommate. And prior to the sororities coming, there was an informal organizations of little sisters at the fraternities, and that had been the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the fraternities had a official system for little sisters. Some of them didn't, and they just made it up. And but almost every fraternity had a little sister organization. And just a group of women got together and said, I don't want to be somebody's little sister. I'm on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually not part of that, although I was a charter sister. I was not part of the original founding group. Sarah Howell was big in that.
Mm-hmm.
So they interviewed they bring three, and it's the same process they use now when they're adding. They bring a couple on and they make a presentation and why should you do this? And I didn't go to any of those. But the Phi Mu was selected. And I did, like I said, Julia was interested in that, and so I joined that. And it was very interesting, being the first one. They didn't quite know what to do with us. We had different rules than the guys. They wanted to treat us like the guys.
Mm-hmm.
But the IFC and the Panhellenic have very different rules and very different ways that the organizations run. And before I graduated, we had brought on Kappa Alpha Theta. That helped, although then you had head-to-head competition, and that was kind of not always healthy.
Sounds diplomatic.
So that was hard, but obviously it worked, and the Thetas are still here.
And you had 50% of the student body women by that point. You certainly had a lot of fraternities,
Right.
So you had enough
We
numbers.
had 9 fraternities.
So you had the numbers.
We had the numbers, and 9 fraternities was really, and still is, too many for a campus of this size.
Mm-hmm.
The men had much more trouble recruiting than we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to be first and to start some traditions and
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of feel our way along and learn how it works. I am still active with my sorority. I'm active in the Richmond area alumni chapter. And, we still do a lot of stuff that's, I think, is really fun. It's fun to have a diverse group of ready-made friends.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed is still active in his fraternity. Ed was a Sigma Phi Epsilon, and he is the chapter advisor for Sigma Phi Epsilon, has been for years. When I came back to work, the Phi Mu's were still here, and I was the chapter advisor for several years. Unfortunately, from some bad behavior on several sides, we lost our charter about 12 or 13 years ago. And so Phi Mu is no longer on the campus.
Mm-hmm. But I will just comment, since this is audio only, you are wearing your pink.
I'm wearing my pink and white.
Yeah, you're wearing the colors, and I just know that because you often commemorate your founding day or different things. So
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I still wear my pin on badge day and things like that because I think it's important that the
Mhm.
girls who are active now understand that this is a lifetime
Yeah.
thing. This isn't joining a club. This
Right.
is something. I still go to Phi Mu meetings.
And you said in the Richmond chapter and event, so that's great.
Mhm.
It's a lifelong,
Yeah,
community. Yeah,
it is.
yeah, that's wonderful. Well, let's talk about after you graduate, and unless you wanted to mention anything else about student days. Okay, so after you graduated from Randolph-Macon, tell us what you did.
So we graduated on a Saturday, and Ed and I got married the following Saturday. We got married at Duncan Memorial Church here on campus. We had our reception in the Brown Campus Center, the old campus center. Our photo was taken by the fountain, and the college uses it from time to time. It's a very Randolph-Macon picture. Ira Andrews, who was the dean of students at the time, but also a Methodist pastor, performed our ceremony. So we had a very Randolph-Macon wedding. And then I went to the Presbyterian School of Christian Education, which is now a part of Union Presbyterian Seminary. And we lived in married student housing, and I did my 2 years and got a master's degree in Christian education. And Ed worked at a variety of places, and eventually he settled working for his dad, and I started working at local churches. I worked for Ginner Park United Methodist Church for 6 years.
Christian education.
Yes, the director of Christian education. I became a certified director of Christian education through the United Methodist Church. There's just some certification stuff you do. They don't do that anymore. They've changed it now, and you become a deacon, and it's different. But at the time, that was what you did, and I did that. I also worked for Epiphany Evangelical Lutheran Church for a couple of years, just because I couldn't find a job in a Methodist church. And I worked for Asbury Memorial United Methodist Church over in Chesterfield when my kids were little. And during all of that, Ed had gone back to school and gotten his PhD in business. And so while I was working over in Chesterfield, he took a position at Eastern Mennonite University, and so we moved to Harrisonburg. And in Harrisonburg, I worked for Otterbein United Methodist Church, and that was fascinating because they had been Evangelical United Brethren, not Methodist. So they had some different traditions and different ways of doing things that I knew nothing about, which was interesting because the church had joined.
They united.
They had united in the 60s. So in my whole life, I had been United Methodist. And growing up in California, there weren't any Evangelical United Brethren who had joined. So we didn't really know who we united with. So that was really interesting to learn who Otterbein was. And of course, that's a Mennonite community. Ed was working for the Mennonite University up there, and so that was a really interesting time. And again, the boys Fox wasn't even in school yet.
Your two sons.
I have two boys. I have one was born in 1990, Davis, and then I have Fox, and he was born in 1996. And his name is Thomas Fox, and he is not named for Foxhall.
We'll clarify that.
I'm just going to say that out loud. That never crossed our minds.
Should be named for
that he was not named for Foxhall. But Randolph-Macon people ask me that all the time. I'm like, I never even had a class in Foxhall. Ed had lots because he was a poli-sci major, but I never did. And so we were at Eastern Mennonite for 2 years, and then we went to North Carolina Wesleyan College, and that was really an interesting move. Ed was recruited, and we decided that it would be fun to go back to a Methodist school. The Mennonites were really lovely, and I really admire them tremendously. But if you're not Mennonite, we were never going to belong. We were always going to be, and there's the Showalters. And we have this really Mennonite name, which we didn't know. We had a really Mennonite name till we moved to the Valley. And so people kept saying, I know your mama. And I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, my mama's name is not Showalter. But I don't think so. We're not, so we never really belonged. And so we moved to North Carolina. And shortly after we got there, the dean of students called me up and asked me if I would come in and go to lunch. And I said, sure, why? and their chaplain had left, and they were not going to replace their chaplain. So they were looking for a director of religious life.
Oh.
And so that just kind of fell in my lap.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, would you be willing to do this for a couple of years while we figure out what we want to do? And I said, sure. So that was really fun.
Mm-hmm. I bet that was I could see you really thriving in a position like that.
Yeah, that was really fun. We were in North Carolina in a kind of difficult time. We hadn't been there very long when Hurricane Floyd came through. So the school was shut for a little while, and then we opened back up, and the public schools were shut for a little while. And one of the things that was interesting is, we bought a house, and our house was fine. Hurricane Floyd did not affect our house. It did affect our neighborhood. The bottom of our neighborhood was flooded. But our house was fine. But every other house we had looked at was flooded.
Mm.
It was, I thought I understood what floods were until Hurricane Floyd came through. And I was supposed to be starting this new job, and my child care's home was flooded, and she was unable to do that. And public schools were closed, so I didn't have a place to send. Davis was in elementary school, Fox was not yet in school. So, and we were all juggling that. I mean, just all these other things that get affected. But that settled down, and we were there for 2 years. North Carolina Wesleyan had its own challenges. While we were there, the president of the college disappeared with his secretary.
Oh my.
I mean, they just took off. No letters of resignation, no nothing. So it was an interesting time. We had a really lovely interim president come and try to, help stabilize the situation. But while we were down there, the position here at Randolph-Macon opened up, and my parents were here, and Ed's parents were here, and we decided it was time to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 2001, we moved back up here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you left in 1984 and came back in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So when you moved back, you moved back because Ed was offered a position in the business department here, right?
Yes.
Teaching business. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then tell us about. So you also came back to work.
So
here.
When we first moved back, I went to work for the Hermitage. I was the activities coordinator for the retirement community there. And I did that. So I didn't come back. Ed came back in 2001. I came back in 2003. The archives position opened up, and I applied for it. And I had no archives experience, but what they were really looking for when I came was somebody to kind of sort out the Methodist stuff.
Mm-hmm. So tell a little. So in the archives we have
because we are the oldest United Methodist related college by date of charter. We have an extensive Methodist collection, and Methodism. Every denomination has its own vocabulary, and so we talk about the annual conference and the conference journal and the, and we talk about deacons and elders, and that means something very different than deacons and elders in the Baptist church and that kind of thing. And so I did a lot of work up there with the Methodist collection, with just kind of sorting it out and figuring out what was, and because we are a united congregation, obviously Randolph-Macon's history has been mostly with the Methodist Episcopal Church South. But there was also the Methodist Episcopal Church, and there was also the Evangelical United Brethren, and some other splinter denominations that got pulled in
when they united
for the joining conference, and so that was very interesting. We have some things that, well, we have a collection. By the United Methodist Church is guided by a discipline. That's what we call our book of order, or other denominations call it other things, but we call ours the discipline. And according to the discipline, bishops' papers are housed at the official archives at Drew University, but we house some bishops' papers because they were given to us. And things, and we didn't even know we weren't supposed to have them.
Oh.
And so there were some things like that were very interesting to find out. We have Bishop Goodson's papers. And Drew doesn't care as long as we've got them indexed and they know where they are.
And they can find if they need something. Yes.
They're like, you guys are safe. We're not worried.
Yeah.
We're worried about them being in some church attic.
Right.
We're not worried about them being with you. But we didn't know that, when I was like, oh, we're not supposed to have these. Do we have to send them to you? And they're like, no, it's fine. So those kind of things are interesting.
Well, just to say one thing about the history, just because I think it is interesting, the Methodist history part. And you mentioned the Methodist Episcopal Church South, which was a breakaway denomination in the 1840s.
Right.
And
way prior to the Civil War.
Right. And so the founding bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church South was also the founding bishop of Randolph-Macon College.
Right.
It's Bishop
Hezekiah Lee.
I was thinking of Early. Because,
and Bishop Early, yes.
Okay,
there was a group.
There was a group, okay, who started the college,
but
certainly.
Hezekiah Lee.
Okay.
And Hezekiah Lee is buried here in Ashland. He was buried at Randolph-Macon College in Boyden, and they dug him up and brought him with them.
So Bishop Lee and Bishop Early were both helped. We're on the board of trust, the group of people who founded the college, and were part of the breakaway group that then founded the denomination. So we do have, there's a strong tie there, so it does make sense that we have those in a way. I didn't know they were supposed to be somewhere else, but I think that's interesting history.
Mm-hmm.
So you worked in the college archives, and primarily with your specialty or expertise was in Methodist, but the archives also house the college papers. Of course, official archives.
Yeah, I learned a tremendous amount about archives. Like I said, I had no archival training, but I took some classes and went to workshops, and we made our first tentative steps into encoded archival description language and just things like that. I was talking with one of the students who's doing some scanning, and I said, it's just amazing to me that just in the now 20 years that I've been here, how far we've come. We bought the first scanner, and we were so excited, and we were scanning them, and we have all these scans, and they're called useful things like Yellow Jacket 1996. That is not useful. We have learned a tremendous amount since we first started playing with the technology. Mm-hmm. But that's how you learn. You play with it, and you think you're calling it something that's going to make perfect sense to everyone in the whole world. And we're learning a lot about metadata and naming conventions and vocabularies and all of that kind of things.
And you learned a lot of college history. I'm sure you knew a lot about being a student, but I'm sure you learned plenty more by working in the archives.
You learn
and answering questions. You were, answering queries when people would ask, or say, my grandfather came here. Can you look him up or do something or other? Yeah. So good. Well, and so that was, you came in 2003, worked in the archives, and which was, will mention, it was a part-time role at that time. And in 2011, you became full-time circulation supervisor.
Yes. In 2011, my kids were a little older. Part-time is a really lovely way to be when your kids are little, if you can do it. But my kids were older, and it was just time to go back to work full-time. And the circulation position came open, and so I applied for it. It's a very different role, very different. a lot more contact with people. The archives is very quiet. And I had one student that worked, sometimes two, but one or two students that worked upstairs. And, you know, downstairs you got 12 students that work for you, and plus ILL students and tech students and other students that are around that you're interacting with. And people are in and out, and faculty are in and out. You're doing very different things.
And your desk where you sit is in a very public, the most public place in the library, behind the information desk.
Right.
So it's very exposed,
Mm-hmm.
where before it was very private.
Right.
Yeah. But I was here during that transition. I have to say, you made that transition beautifully, and I can't imagine who could do it better. I mean, I think you're managing at the students and all the things that get thrown at you. You have a very calm demeanor, and which is necessary in that kind of role. And I hope that was a good move for you.
Yeah, it was. I have enjoyed, and I've learned a lot. Up in the archive, you don't spend a lot of time dealing with the library management system, which changed
Mm-hmm.
while I was here. But I think I knew how to check a book out in case I happened to be downstairs and the only person around.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly wasn't anything I was comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn a lot about the library management system. You learn a lot about reserves and which faculty use reserves and which faculty don't use reserves, and
Mm-hmm.
what the various...
Lots of interaction with faculty, really.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing you really learn just through the years of doing it is you learn the people, the regular names that come up frequently, the students, not just the workers, but student patrons who patronize the library the most.
Mm-hmm.
And you also learn the collection. You don't even realize that you're learning that, but after several years, you just know things about what's up in the stacks and what isn't.
Right, and how to find things, and
Mm-hmm.
when I'm working with a student who's going upstairs to find a book for the first time, and I say, yeah, this is how you read the call number, and when you get to the stairs, turn right, because it's going to be on about the third range on your right. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, just, if you can't find it, come back down and I'll help you, but that's where it is.
Yeah.
And things like that, although right now we're shifting, and I went looking for a PA yesterday, and it wasn't where it belonged.
Well, hopefully it was where it belonged in the new
It was just a
arrangement.
couple of rows
Yeah.
over where
Yeah.
they had shifted it.
Yeah. Well, do you want to? Are there any other people that you want to mention, because your work, especially having been here so long, you have a lot of contacts all across the college. Other people or offices to mention?
we've had quite a bit of turnover in the library.
Mm-hmm.
Ginger Young was the library director when I started, and Nancy Newens was the reference librarian when I started, and then
So you reported to her,
I
Nancy.
reported to
Oh,
Nancy.
okay. Mm-hmm.
And Nancy left probably a year or two after. When did you and Lori come?
Yeah, Laurie came in February of 2005, so Nancy must have left at the end of 2005.
So around there, and Lori
Four.
came in,
End of
and
2005.
then you came in, and
Mm-hmm.
Deanna left, and you came in, and I don't even remember who had Jenny's position before Jenny came.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we've had quite a bit of turnover,
Mm-hmm.
but Lily was here. I think Lily's the
Mhm.
only one who's been here longer than I have.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so there is a lot of turnover, but the role, and some of the roles change, but the functions of the library continue.
Yes. Well, and the library looks very different. I mean, some of that's because we got to do this major refresh last summer, not 1 minute before we needed it. but we've moved the hack in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we now share space, which we did not do prior. And we've got the maker space that we're sitting in right now. And that was certainly not something we had in 2003 when I came. And in fact, in 2003 when I came, this space that is the maker space was the computer room. And that was new and exciting, that we had a computer lab. That was a big deal. And now we don't have a computer lab, and that's a big deal.
Now
So
we
again,
check out. We have laptops available for checkout, but we don't maintain a whole room full of desktops like we did.
Right, and
several.
and so our role in that way, our library role has changed a great deal with the technology as it changes, and trying to keep up with what the students need now. Which, you know, when I was a student in 1984, we had a card catalog. And the big green books, the guide to periodic
for periodical indexes, yes.
Yeah, the guide to periodic literature, the big green books, and microfilm, and just, you know, watching the microfilm and microfiche collection get smaller and smaller and smaller is interesting. That's been a big change while I've been here. And when I started, we had videotapes.
Oh, VHS. Yes, a lot of VHS.
And VHS is bulky and it takes a lot of space. And DVDs are much more compact, and we're going to have fewer and fewer of those now as everything is streaming.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of challenges that we've been trying to keep up with.
Yeah, a lot of changes in the types of materials, and right.
Right, and then we had COVID.
Yeah,
which again changed the types of materials we were interested in and we needed to have, and we needed to be online. The kids needed to be able to access this stuff from home, or when we did bring them back, they still needed to be able to access it from their dorm rooms, and they needed not to be touching computers that everybody else was touching, and we needed to be able to isolate and so just little things like when I first started with the circulation desk, we didn't do holds. The kids couldn't place holds on materials. We started that for COVID. We still do that, so you can, but that's just a change in how we deal with people that has gone on.
Well, anything else about COVID, because that is such a watershed event, I mean, in the world, and we all lived through it, and I think we're still so close to it in 2023. I don't think we even know all the ramifications, but anything else you want to mention about COVID, because that was a challenge.
COVID was a challenge. Lisa Gaza is our cataloger. Or our metadata associate. And I were talking the other day about the various challenges that we have had in the library. And again, COVID was certainly a big one. I remember my student workers coming through as we didn't know we were closing down. We were sending them home for an extra long spring break. You're going to be gone for an extra week. It's going to be fine. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Little did I know that I was not going to see them for months. And that was...
I remember that.
Yeah, that was
See you in April.
Yeah. You'll be back. It'll be fine. We'll be fine. You go home. Go home, be safe. And then the next thing we knew, we weren't here, and then nobody came back, and then nobody came back over the summer, and we still had one student that was here who couldn't go home. I don't know if you remember. We had Molly.
Oh.
You don't remember Molly? And so she was still doing inventory. She was coming over by herself and doing inventory because she lived in New York and she couldn't get home.
Oh, right. New York.
There wasn't a way for her to go home.
The city was closed, right.
Yeah, and so she was stuck here doing her classes in the
24/7.
Well, she was online in her dorm and that kind of thing. But we got permission for her to still come in. I don't remember all the details now, but I remember that I would get inventory reports from Molly emailed to me.
Yeah, we just got those done.
That she just kept going. And, these things that kids were going through, it was hard enough to be at home. I can't imagine how hard it was for her to be the only person in her dorm.
Yeah.
And we couldn't, when we've had international students who can't go home for Christmas, we've invited them home, but we couldn't do that. She wasn't in my bubble. I couldn't.
Yeah, we couldn't do it.
I couldn't help her.
And when the students, I know there's some of the students going home, and then they spent the next year at home, and just the challenges of that when the parents are working at home and the younger siblings are trying to do school, and there's just not enough literally bandwidth, and they couldn't get on the classes, and just the challenges.
It was, and just, emailing with them and checking in with the students that work for us and just trying to make sure everybody was okay. And, everybody was okay, but okay took on a whole different meaning.
Yeah. I just talked about COVID. I'll just say this for the record, too. I had an advisee who didn't have internet access at home, and in order to take her classes, went to the parking lot of her old high school and just sat.
And she was probably not the only one doing that.
Yeah, and just sat in her car, and just the challenges of some of that. But we could just do an entire oral history on COVID, I'm sure.
Yes. So that was interesting. And as I said, as Lisa and I were talking about, the summer before that had been the summer of mold. The library had an outbreak, or actually, I guess it was 2 years before that. The summer before that had been the first inventory, and then the summer before that was mold. And so we kept having these just challenges. The library had we had a mold outbreak, and we had to have somebody come in and clean all of our books. And
the first company that came didn't do it well or correctly, and so Nancy fired them and hired somebody else.
Right. And just yesterday, the current summer project is that the students are shifting the circulating collection upstairs. But I was upstairs pulling a music book yesterday, and I'm sitting on the floor, and before they get to the M's, I need to go back and unscrew it up. We missed it when we shelf read. It's like, this shelf should be on the shelf above, and this shelf should be down here, and I don't know if the kids will catch it when they're shifting. Mm-hmm. So I need to go put a big flag in it. It says, straighten this out before you shift it.
Well, we have definitely had some challenges. And just while we're talking about COVID, I do want to say for the record, when we went home for COVID, everyone had to work from home. And one of the work from home projects that Judee took on was transcribing and proofreading many of the Macon Memory oral histories, which I am eternally grateful for your doing that. And it was so helpful for you to do that, Judee, because the hardest part about proofreading or doing these are the names of people and places. The proper names are really the stumbling block for transcription, and you know a lot of those names are faculty or people, and so you were just a great person to do that, and I want to thank you on the record for doing that.
Well, you're welcome. It was fascinating, and I remember one Zoom staff meeting we had, and we were talking about what we were all doing at home, and Nancy asked me how that was going, and I said, it's been fascinating, because some of them make you laugh, and some of them make you cry, and reading ones that you've done with, like Buster Ward, who isn't with us anymore, and
Ira Andrews,
and then they start talking about people. Ira talks about BJ, and BJ Seymour was a religious studies professor who was instrumental in my life, she's one of the reasons I came here.
Mm-hmm.
And she was also the first dean of women.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so reading Ira talking about BJ
Mm-hmm.
was just really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And, some of them are not as interesting as others, but
Right.
some of them are just
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Well, just I want to thank you for all your memories that you've shared so far, and I just wanted to know if there were any other, satisfying experiences or challenging experiences or anything that stood out that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention in your time here, either as a student or as a staff member.
I am sure there are things I will say I should have talked about.
That's so broad.
It's been interesting to watch the physical changes in the campus.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a student here, we used to joke that you could stand on a tuna can and see the whole campus. And that is certainly no longer true. And when I was a student here, Washington Franklin Hall was condemned and boarded up, and the second and third floors of Thomas Branch were condemned and boarded up. And so to watch those buildings come back to life has been it just wonderful. Just to see the what they did with Thomas Branch is just amazing. When I was a student, Mary Branch was not air conditioned. I lived in Mary Branch South. I lived in every corner of Mary Branch South. So I lived in the same dorm for all 4 years, and I loved it. They're bigger rooms than fancy modern dorms, but we were not air conditioned, and so that's been a big change to see that. And the dorms that were the new fancy dorms when I was a student, Conrad and Moreland, we knew Conrad as new dorm, and we knew Copley as the science building. It was not yet named. And so we just called it the science building. And it was new and shiny, and now we're looking at it, it seems very dated. And having listened to James Scanlon's lecture on the architecture of the college, understanding why it seems so dated and how it's very reflective of when it was built. And I really thought I would be sad when the campus center, the Brown Campus Center, was torn down. And it really wasn't, because the new campus center, although it has its own flaws, it serves the students so much better than the old one did.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm sure in 20 years it will be dated and need to be changed, but seeing that
And the football field's completely
seeing
different.
The football field got turned and separated from the baseball field, and has dorms around it now, and that whole complex looks absolutely different. And we referred to what is now the freshman village as the motel dorms.
Yeah.
We always called them the motels. We still call them the motels. The president still asks us to stop doing that. So you can tell the age of the alumni by what they call the freshman village. But they look, inside they still look the same, which is kind of sad. But they look totally different from the outside.
Yeah.
And just those kind of changes, the physical changes, have been very interesting. And the different ways we relate to students is very interesting. When I was a student, we had a dean of students, and he had an assistant. We had Ira Andrews, and he had Catherine Hall. And they ran it. And now we have a student life staff and a residence life staff. The two of them did all of that. And so it's very I think that, we just offer so much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the support side of student life on campus is so much different.
We had one person in the counseling center, and he did counseling and career counseling. And, so the support side has just grown tremendously, and I think that's very helpful for students. I think they need it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a completely different culture. Campus life is very different.
Yeah, it's very different from.
Yeah. Well, any other memories or stories that you would like to share?
Yeah, I have one other story. So when as I said, I lived in every corner of Mary Branch South. And one homecoming, my roommate and I were making our beds and moving around, and there's this knock on our door. And we open up the door, and it's a very nice lady, and she says, my husband wanted me to tell you that he's not being creepy. He's fascinated by the lace curtains hanging in his window. We had these ruffly lace curtains hanging in his window in Mary Branch, and the fact that there were women in Mary Branch just was cracking him up. He was taking a picture. We hadn't even noticed, but we're like, well, thank you for letting us know, because we would have thought it was creepy, some man taking a picture of our window. And we thought that was very, very funny. And a couple of years, in fact, the first year I was working as the circulation supervisor, I was chatting with Tim Eicher, who was a student who worked for me, and he told me what room he lived in. It was my room. And I was like, no, that's a girl's room.
You were doing the same.
And I was like, okay, I can get over this now. Tim is living in my dorm.
Well, where are the lace curtains?
Yes, that's what I said. I bet the lace curtains are not hanging in your... And he's just looking at me like, what lace curtains? There's no curtains. I'm a guy. We have blinds. They pull down. So that was kind of interesting how you...
Mm-hmm.
I suddenly understood this guy's reaction much better than I did when I was a student.
Mm-hmm. The circle of life.
The circle of life, having Tim live, and now I love it that Tim lived in my room.
Yeah. Well, Judee Showalter, there's so many good memories, and I just appreciate your coming and making memories and sharing them. And we'll just say we were really going to miss you terribly in the library, but wish you all the best in your retirement.
Thank you.